Hello everyone and welcome to Makai-World Reviews. I'm of course the Zona Makai. I missed the mark in January due to my ever ongoing illness, but I'm going to pretend like that didn't happen and let's just move forward with movies with more famous remakes like I was doing. After Scarface last month, I guess, we're going to be looking at the 1958 movie, The Fly. And of course, we will be comparing it to the Cronenberg version near the end. So go ahead and hit subscribe, and let's get into it. The Fly, directed by Kurt Neumann, a man who's at the tail end of his career here, which included at least 4 Tarzan movies, Kronos and She-Devil, which I liked, and of course, MST3K level movie in Rocket Ship XM. He's had ups, downs, and everything in betweens. Written by James Clavell, a man who helped write a movie I looked at some time ago in The Great Escape. And frankly, between The Fly and The Great Escape, I don't need to add any more to this man's resume. Based on the short story The Fly by George Langland and starring Al Hedson. As with a lot of actors back then, he was a staple on TV for a hell of a long time, but what I most know him from is being one of the Felix Leiters in Live and Let Die and License to Kill. And of course, Vincent Price, beating Sean Bean out for a lauded title of Man Most Killed in Movies, a staple of horror, sci-fi, and so much more, the incredibly talented and just plain fun to watch Vincent Price, a man that can hardly be equaled. The release date for this was July 16th, 1958, and what came out the same week? Frankenstein 1970, kind of a bog-standard Frankenstein movie with Boris Karloff as the titular doctor. It didn't add anything, didn't really take anything away, and didn't take place in 1970, so whatever. And Rockabye Baby, rather famous Jerry Lewis comedy sing-along that was received well. I recall seeing this when I was younger, but I'm not much of a musical fan. Still think I probably enjoyed it then. Let's move on over to the plot. In Quebec, of all places, we find Professor Andre Delambre crushed to death in a hydraulic press, a la Terminator 1. Not long after, Helen, Andre's wife, calls Andre's brother Francois and confesses to the crime. Francois contacts an inspector he knows to figure out just what the hell's going on. This begins the investigation of the death of Andre. To wit, there are some inconsistencies. Helen freely admits that she did kill her husband, says it was an act of euthanasia. But she can't say why. She also can't say why the press was used twice, why Andre's lab was destroyed, nor why she suddenly has a budding interest bordering on psychotic with flies, literally chasing after them. Helen begins to be treated by a doctor for her obvious mental instabilities, while the inspector gathers whatever evidence he can. Her son, Philippe, begins to stand with Francois for the time being, obviously for his own safety. Helen eventually decides she wants to tell the whole truth, and Francois summons the inspector to hear the tale. Andre spent more time in his lab with his family, with what he was working on was, well, teleportation. After some mistakes with a plate and, sadly, a cat, he seems to have perfected it, thinking he can save the world with his new invention. Distance will now be a mere concept. No longer will people go hungry. No longer will we need airlines, etc., etc. All very altruistic, of course. But then something goes wrong. Andre seems to go MIA. And so Helen finally decides to figure out, Andre, what's happening with you? He is covering his head and arm. He can only talk and writing things out. His laboratory is trashed. She tries to satiate him with his new, confusing requests, including rum water, and to find a particular fly. Well, we all know where this is going, when Andre's head and arm are revealed to be that of a fly. This happens when one got into the teleporter when Andre was using it. The capturing a fly business goes nowhere, really, and Andre begins to lose his sanity. He requests Helen kill him, and they go to the hydraulic press. After a brief tutorial, she uses it, but realizes she only destroyed the head, so has to use the press again to crush the abominable arm. Well, having told her tale, the inspector doesn't believe her until him and Francois witness something. A fly with Andre's head and arm about to be consumed by a spider in its web. The inspector quickly crushes it, and him and Francois conspire together to say that Andre committed suicide, having no other options. In the end, Francois does his best to treat Helen and Felipe with care, and tells the boy his father died searching for the truth. A noble goal. All right, let's talk about this film. You may notice I am not on camera. I don't really feel like being on camera at the moment, so I have some very pleasant B-roll playing. I will have where I got the B-roll down below. But of course, we start off with directing and cinematography. This is a fairly simple film. It's almost a bottle episode. It's pretty much the entirety of the film takes place in Andre and Helen's house. His lab is in the basement. She spends most of the time in bed. The ending is in their garden. We see Francois' house briefly, a club the inspector is at, and the workshop where the hydraulic press is at, and briefly like a ballet. But those scenes probably cover less than 10 minutes of the runtime. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't need to go a lot of places. It's a fairly straightforward plot that the crux of it is told in flashback. It does drag, honestly. There is so much time spent talking or looking for this fly, and they kind of frame it as a mystery, but we know damn well Andre's part of the fly pretty quickly. And it is like, oh, they're looking for the fly. Did they find it? Nope, it's just a regular fly. They do this gimmick a few times. So yeah, narrative-wise, there will be moments you hope they get to the next beat, especially because the beats are actually satisfying. I'll go into the particulars of the characters shortly, but the tension is there. The mystery of why the press was used twice. And the horror beats, the reveal of the fly looks great. It's not scary, obviously, but it's a really well done moment. And honestly, the reveal Helen had to destroy the arm, and that explains the press, was kind of sad and horrific. So yeah, it was a mixed bag, directing-wise, but the scene looked generally pretty good. The sets were believable, looked like a house, looked realistic enough. Going over to the characters, there aren't many, but that's really the strength of the film. Starting with Andre, of course. Frankly, Andre is the best movie version of Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four we've gotten on film, which is sad. First off, he's a slick-looking, clean-shaven white guy in a lab coat, if only he had some salt and pepper hair. He loves his family, but is totally and completely dismissive of them for science. He is altruistic to a fault, not really seeing the dangers of the things he makes until it's too late. And he's reckless enough to think his genius will carry him through any problems, which we find out with both isn't true. Though Reed got cool stretch guy powers and Andre got turned into a fly, he's a compelling character, and Al Hudson gives him a lot more pathos than he had any right to. Him slowly breaking down after becoming the fly, saying he's losing his mind, he's losing his sense of self, was compelling, and frankly, I wish we got a lot more of that acting than we did people looking for a fucking fly. He famously complained about the weight of the prosthetics of the fly outfit, and that's fair, but it looked good, like a lot better than I had any right to. So I almost forgot, though, he did kill his cat, and it's never mentioned what happened to the cat, and he shows no emotion about it. The cat just disappears. Was it turned into the milk it went in with? It's a scene that almost feels tacked on. It's very odd, and I think it hurts Andre's character just a little bit. To Helen, the long-suffering wife, the main character of the movie, who mostly talks in exposition and lies in bed. She's well acted, but boy, the scripts did her no favors. I believe her. I believe her loving her husband and doing the right thing. And honestly, I feel that she seems a little bit relieved. They had a strained relationship at best, and she does nothing to dissuade that when interrogated by the investigator, saying neither she nor Andre ever cheated, and that really being her whole explanation on how happy they were together. Her crazy bit is a little bit confusing, as she forgets her son for a brief period of time, but they never expand on that. They never go anywhere with that, and she doesn't exhibit any of the crazies that aren't explained by the plot. I liked her portrayal and sincerely wish she was given more to do than be an expository fly chaser, as she was the lead on the biggest boring moments of the movie. She does give us an absolute coldest moment in the film, where she crushes Andre's head with the press, then realizes his fly arm wasn't in there, so crushes that without any hesitation. She wanted her husband to have some dignity in death. To Francois and Felipe. Starting with Felipe, I'm not one to bash child actors, as it's not easy for them to do that much with what they are given. But God, this kid's really annoying. He's Opie. He's just not a good part of this film, and his voice is genuinely grating. I'm not going to say much more. He got a heartfelt moment at the end, but beyond that, he could have been replaced with a dog or something, and it really wouldn't have changed much. Francois, this was really a waste of Vincent Price. This is said to be his first real foray into the horror genre that would come to define him in subsequent decades, and I guess it shows. He's demure, soft-spoken, totally passive, mostly kind of there just to get Helen to talk. There's a strange subplot about him being in love with Helen that goes nowhere. If you're going into this expecting a Vincent Price vehicle, you're going to be sorely disappointed. The inspector, I rather like the inspector. He's the straight man in the movie to Helen's seeming insanity and Francois' impotence. He's level-headed, strong-willed, and incredibly polite, while being very matter-of-fact. He's kind of the antagonist of sorts, besides Andre's indulgence into science, of course, being the man who wants to put Helen away. He's the one who kills Andre as a fly, seeing him about to be eaten by a spider and murdering it in a rather kind of shocking scene with a rock. And then he is put in a predicament where if Helen is responsible for killing a man with a fly head, he's responsible for killing a fly with a man's head. Don't know if that's on the books. Never saw that Law & Order episode. So he agrees to the fix. A nice resolution to the Helen's definitely going to jail thing. I just want to mention the maid cook lady real briefly. She wasn't a very important part of the film, but she was played by Kathleen Freeman, who deserves a note, as she was in hundreds of movies and TV shows. She's part of this American's historical zeitgeist, with things like the Blues Brothers, Naked Gun, Rugrats, Home Improvement, Roseanne, Married with Children, Doogie Howser, MD, etc., etc. If you don't know her visually, you know her voice. Trust me, I just enjoy her presence, and she deserves a note here. Let's compare this to The Fly from 1986. The 58 Fly is framed as a kind of mystery told in flashback, told at the end of the story, while the Cronenberg one tells the horrific struggle of a man becoming Bug. The Goldblum Brundle Fly is arguably more iconic than Andre's Help Me Fly, but they both have their place in history. I almost feel unfair comparing the two, as Cronenberg had always been known to push boundaries, as he did with The Fly, to far more of an extreme than the 58 one could have ever imagined. He showed us the true horror of science, though I think it lost a little bit of the moralizing that this older version had. We hear that Andre died for truth, for finding something to help people, while Seth Brundlefly, dialogue and motive is never Cronenberg's strong suit, and it's far more about the body horror aspect. So they both have something of some merit, but if I was going to sit down and watch one, it would be the Cronenberg one without hesitation. It's got far less boring padding and nonsense to it. Music-wise, this is a fairly good soundtrack. It's got that appropriate orchestral in-house feel for a movie of this era. I was never distracted by it in a bad way, and noted it positively in the more tense moments, especially the big fly reveals of Andre's head and then him in the web. Used that musical tension just perfectly. So yeah, nothing I've listed outside of the film, but definitely used well. Overall, this is a movie that, while I have had a lot of good things to say about it, I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you are a Vincent Price completist, someone who needs to see an original or some other reason. We get the point, and I think Cronenberg's version did it better in most ways. It's a classic with good reason, but it's such a classic that everybody already kind of knows the score, and it doesn't offer an interesting experience enough to warrant return. Well, that was The Fly. Do you have a favorite Fly movie? There are lots more than you might imagine to choose from, sadly. Let me know down below. Also, add me on Instagram under Demon Peaks for Twin Peaks memes. Check out my Patreon when you can support me for just as little as $1 to help keep me alive. Come back next week where I'll be looking at the 1962 version of the film Cape Fear. And finally, subscribe. Have a great day, a great week, and just know that Master of Minds and of Men, the Tona Makai, loves you. Goodbye.